Welcome back to the Battlefield Brief. My name is Craig, and I am glad you tuned in today. Let's take a look at what happened across the competitive Warhammer 40,000 scene this week. We're breaking down the latest tournament results, faction win rates, player numbers, and the armies shaping the current meta. Using tournament data from 3 tournament tracking sites, the Battlefield Brief pulls the information after the final tournament closes and turns the weekly numbers into reports we can review Monday morning and use to prepare for the next event. First, let's turn to meta balance and focus on what stands out this week. This week's meta balance score is 67.9%, with 19 factions inside the target range. This is a 10.8% improvement from last week. And this is good to see as we look forward to the Ork Codex release in 2 weeks. The important point is not to read every value, but to identify the results that most clearly shape the competitive picture. Keep that result in mind as we move to all faction win rates. Now let's look at the big picture and see how every faction performed this week. The 45 to 55% balance zone gives us a quick view of which armies are overperforming, which are struggling, and how much of the field remains in a healthy range. Chaos Daemons are on top of the field this week at 62.4% across 40 players, 4.8 percentage points above its 4-week average. Among its undefeated and one-loss lists, Priority Assets was the most used disposition. Eldari are second and make a huge move up at 60.0% across 28 players, 12.5 percentage points above its 4-week average. Eldari players use Reconnaissance as the most used disposition. Adeptus Custodes are number 3 at 57.0% across 59 players, and are holding steady at 2.9 percentage points above its 4-week average. Among its undefeated and one-loss lists, Disruption was the most used disposition. Deathwatch are number 4 at 55.0% across 8 players, 1.8 percentage points above its 4-week average. Among its undefeated and one-loss lists, Priority Assets was the most used disposition. Orks are number 5 at 53.2% across 61 players, 4.0 percentage points below its 4-week average. Deathwatch players use Take and Hold as the most used disposition. In the upper half of the balance zone, from 50 through 55%, are Tau Empire, Tyranids, Necrons, Emperor's Children, Dark Angels, Thousand Suns. In the lower half of the balance zone, from 45 up to 50%, are World Eaters, Chaos Space Marines, Space Wolves, Imperial Agents, Leagues of Votan, Astra Militarum, Death Guard, Drukhari, Adeptus Mechanicus, Imperial Knights. Below the 45% balance line this week are Blood Angels, Chaos Knights, Black Templars, Grey Knights, Adeptus Sororitas, Genestealer Cults. Small player samples this week include Deathwatch with 8 players, Imperial Agents with 5 players, Genestealer Cults with 11 players. Those results may move quickly as more tournaments are added. This is a 1-week faction snapshot, so win rate is best read alongside representation and the 4-week trend. Keep that result in mind as we look at faction balance. Now, let's compare this week's results with each faction's 4-week average. Green bars show factions performing above their recent baseline, while red bars show factions that slipped below it. Eldari posted the strongest gain, finishing 12.5% above its 4-week average. Imperial Agents also posted a large gain, finishing 6.9 percentage points above its 4-week average. Imperial Guard had a big move up of 6.4% against their average. This puts them inside the 45 to 55% win rate zone for the first time in 11th edition. And Genestealer Cults had the largest decline, finishing 17.2 percentage points below its 4-week average. This chart measures movement against recent form rather than overall faction strength, so the biggest swings are the story rather than every bar. That provides the key context before we look at undefeated and one-loss lists. From there, let's see which factions are producing the most top-table results. This chart shows undefeated lists and one-loss lists by faction, giving us a broader view than simply looking at a single event winner. Orks are very popular and produced good results with 32 undefeated lists and 105 one-loss lists, for 137 top finishes overall. Space Marines produced 24 undefeated lists and 91 one-loss lists, for 115 top finishes overall. And Necrons produced 24 undefeated lists and 73 one-loss lists, for 97 top finishes overall. Raw top finish counts still favor factions with more representation, so the useful question is whether the leading armies combine broad participation with repeated high finishes. That provides the key context before we move to most played factions. We now shift from performance to popularity and see what people are playing. These are the armies shaping pairings, practice plans, and the matchups you are most likely to face. The current snapshot includes 1,021 players across the faction field, The top 3 factions on this chart are the same as the winning lists chart, but in a different order. Space Marines rank number 1 in player representation with 62 players, or 6.1% of the field. Orks are second in player representation with 61 players, or 6.0% of the field. And Necrons showed third in player representation with 61 players, or 6.0% of the field. Representation matters for preparation, but popularity by itself is not evidence of competitive strength. Keep that result in mind as we move to Disposition Breakdown. Now, let's look at how players are building their armies across the 5 dispositions. This chart shows the dispositions of undefeated and one-loss lists for the week. This is not showing us what disposition is the most popular, but dispositions giving the best finishes at tournaments. This is pulling from 1328 undefeated and one-loss lists. Take and Hold is the most common disposition, with 330 lists, or 24.8% of the undefeated and one-loss field. Purge the Foe is next, with 316 lists and a 23.8% share, just 1.0 percentage points behind the leader. Priority Assets is third, with 270 winning lists. That provides the key context before we move to largest events. Next, let's turn to the events behind the numbers. The larger the field, the more games that event contributes to the overall faction results and trends. This week's dataset includes 24 events and 1,057 players. Smite Club Open 2026, 40K Worlds Qualifier and Fundraiser, was the largest event by attendance, with 130 players, accounting for 12.3% of all event players. Huxley's Open 2026, Warhammer 40K, ranks number 2 by attendance, with 99 players, accounting for 9.4% of all event players. Large events carry meaningful sample weight, but no single tournament should be treated as the entire meta. Keep that result in mind as we move to Event Deep Dive. For this week's Event Spotlight, let's dig into the biggest event and the winning list. Smite Club Open 2026, 40K Worlds Qualifier and Fundraiser was the largest event of the week, with 130 players and was classified as a major. This was held in Phoenix, Arizona. The event represented 12.3% of all players in the weekly event dataset. Gwen Godfrey posted the top recorded result at 6-0, piloting Tau Empire. The list used the experimental prototype Cadre Kauyon detachment under the Priority Assets disposition. Congratulations to Gwen and Tau. The event size, winning faction, detachment, disposition, and record together provide a useful snapshot of one of the week's most important competitive results. It is a strong result from one of the biggest competitive stages of the week. That brings us to the end of this week's Battlefield Brief. Keep these trends in mind as you build your list, plan your practice games, and prepare for your next event. Let me know in the comments what you're playing and which part of the meta you want us to cover next. Subscribe for next week's tournament report, and until then, good luck at the tables.